I mean, land has got several advantages which both, I would say, the air domain and the maritime domain do not have. Firstly, in the land, you're not that vulnerable, in the sense that, of course, even though they are mobile, you can harden, you can camouflage, you can disperse. You're not susceptible to weather conditions. You don't have any all-up weight limitations. You can regenerate as soon as you want to.
We have been looking at weapons as an end in itself, as this or this, which is my biggest argument today against most of the thinkers when you talk about drones and missiles. I said, it's not this or that. They have put all together, expanded the realm of offensive warfighting capability of any medium using the aerial vector or the aerial medium.
Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of WM Dialogues. Today, I'm delighted to have as my guest Air Marshal Diptendu Choudhury. Actually, he needs no introduction, but let me do that all the same. Spent 37 years in the Air Force, 5,000 hours of operational experience on flying fighter aircraft. I mean, that is enormous by any standards. Fully operational on the MiG-21, MiG-27, MiG-29, Sukhoi 30, primarily all Russian aircraft, so it seems.
Russian.
Done the Fighter Combat Leaders course, instrument rating instructor and examiner, has served 2 tenures in the Tactics and Air Combat Development Establishment. The second one, if I'm not mistaken, as the commandant.
As the commandant.
And if I recollect, at that time when I was here at the War College, you had come and spoken also, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, that time I was the AOC Cobra Group.
Okay, yeah, you had come as AOC Cobra Group. Yeah. Has been the Air Defense Commander of the Central Air Command and the Western Air Command, and the Southwestern Air Command, is it right? Or the Western
CSE and SWAC.
And SWAC, yeah. And apart from that, has served as the Assistant Chief of Air Staff Inspections at, that is DASI, if I'm not
That's
yeah. I mean, that I think is the terror organization in the Air Force.
They're not very popular after tenure there.
And then topped it all, of course, with SASO of the Western Air Command, and finally ended up at the National Defense College. Retired in 2019, and thereafter, has been, I would say, one of the most voracious readers and writers for the Air Force. And I think you've done a tremendous amount of work in putting forward the case for air power in the country. So let me congratulate you for that.
Thank you.
So today I thought, we'll discuss, let me start on offensive air power. And while speaking of offensive air power, let me start with bombers. Bombers seems to be the flavor of the day, in fact. After this midnight hammer on 21st June, where you had these 9, if I'm not mistaken, B-2 Spirit bombers. 7, I think, were used in the operation itself, and 2 were decoys, if I'm not mistaken. And these 7 carried 14 of these GBU massive burst ordnance, to penetrate into 2 of the nuclear facilities over there in Iran. These being Natanz and Fordo, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, these 2. So that's one side of the story, of course. The US built 21 of these. The number was meant to be much larger, but they scaled down finally to 21, out of which 19 are still operational, and of which 9 took part. So a sizable number took part, and a tremendously complex operation, I would say, coming all the way from the US mainland in Ohio. I think that's where they're based. Flying with mid-air refueling, 150 aircrafts, they say, were used in this entire package, for this whole thing to go through. The other side of the story is what's happened in Russia, spider's web. And over there, you've had, bombers which have been hit by relatively inexpensive munitions and drones, drones costing maybe in the region of around less than around $4,000-5,000 because of the short-range drones, absolutely. And they took down, I mean, these numbers are debatable. Yeah, some say of 40 plus, but 13 at least are confirmed.
It's in double figures, most certainly.
Yeah. So you're talking about, Tu-95 Bears and the Tu-22M backfire bombs. Yes. So, I mean, in that context, let me ask firstly is, where do you see the case for bombers as instruments of offensive air power in the from a philosophical point of view, that is overall, and for the case for India as well?
Thanks, Monty. I mean, that's a fascinating question because, very interestingly, this is a question which I think within the Air Force we've been internalizing for a long time, for the longest period of time. And I think from an Indian context, first I'll go back into the historical philosophy from an Indian context, and from an air power context, bombers became the mainstay of air power. I mean, because of the older bombing theories, bombing cities, centers, industrial centers, from Doohe downwards, which came down to Billy Mitchell, the whole lot of them. Trenchard Billy Mitchell in the World War One and Two, World War One, and that sort of became the norm for World War Two as well. So strategic bombing continued to great effect right down to Tokyo. The bombing of the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Japan and Nagasaki. But what was interesting is that the Cold War stepped in. So now it became the delivery platform for the nuclear weapon. So willy-nilly, it came into the league of a larger strategic concept. Now, because we always talked about equated nuclear operations or anything in that domain with a strategic approach. So willy-nilly, strategic came to be equated with a nuclear perspective. It sort of took away the outlook from a conventional strategic capability to a non-conventional or a nuclear capability. So that is what the world came to at that point in time, till in the 70s, late 70s, after Vietnam, when strategic bombing failed to produce outcomes in the manner desired, there was a resurgence of tactical air power in the US itself. And there was a whole thing, they called it the fighter mafia, which they sort of restored power back to tactical air force. And that made sense because by then, even in the US, I beg your pardon, in the USSR, in the Cold War era, within the Warsaw Pact country, they had changed the strategic outlook.
Right.
Tactical nuclear weapons came in. If you remember, the tripwire strategy was to trip up the NATO so that the Warsaw Pact, basically the USSR could act first. So it brought in a dispersed outlook to strategic bombing per se.
Okay.
The Russian military machine never looked at the bombers as anything more than a platform for strategic weapon delivery, and not so much as in war fighting. Conceptual difference, because the USSR was oriented towards air defense of the mainland, heartland. So this was the contextual background. India, we started out, I mean, we are all aware that we all grew up with a British legacy. And yes, and the outlook, the British outlook was deliberate. That means the Indian Air Force, which came to, was formed before independence actually, unfortunately was kept at the tactical end of things, right from the watch and ward missions, which was flown in the Northwest Frontier Province against the tribal areas, right down to the Burma campaign. So when it came to the Burma campaign, the IF never went past tactical operations supporting the army. So this was the legacy we came from, and as we transited into independence, there was a fair amount of effort to revive bombers. We recovered the US Liberator bombers, and some of them. A fantastic effort by, I think, Air Marshal Harjeet Singh, who indigenized this effort and made that. But what is unfortunate part is that, it's impossible to keep a fleet together like that without adequate supply chains, maintenance effort. It was enormous. So we had no choice. And actually the death, knell was sounded by Blackett. Peter Blackett, who was a sort of scientific and military advisor, very close to that time Jawaharlal Nehru in that point in time. And he actually influenced India's scientific community in a long way.
He was a Brit?
He was a Brit who stayed back and who was used as an advisor. He was hugely influential. Interestingly, enormous role to play in the Royal Navy. And he was a great proponent of naval warfare and the use, because he was a man with a scientific bent of mind who brought in science and military together. And when it came to the Air Force, when Nehru actually asked him what kind of Air Force or what kind of military should we have, so he was very clear, because he took the word of the need for the nation to be self-reliant. He narrowed and trimmed everything down from a self-reliance perspective. So he said, look, you don't need long range bombers. What are your threats? Your threats are tactical. And that time, post independence, we had a lot of internal threats as well. So he says India doesn't need bombers. And that is what actually made a huge difference. So if you remember, after the Liberator, the only thing we ever purchased, but we needed the bomber. So we got the Canberra,
Right.
electric lightning Canberra, which we used to great effect
Yeah.
in all our operations. But the point is, it was a light bomber and it fitted only a certain segment of our warfighting needs, which subsequently got filled by the long range multi role fighters, because which could pretty much do the same thing.
Carry the same payload.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when it came to heavy bombers, we moved away from this concept. In fact, in the past, I think the doyen of Indian Air Force, Jasjit Singh, he has articulated very clearly in his book that there is a necessity for India to get long range bombers long back. But at some point we couldn't afford it. It became because it's very difficult to get a bomber which you want. So the options were there to release the Russian bombers. We tried with that. And at some point it was found not so cost effective because of where we were as a nation in the growth trajectory in the past, in terms of power and requirements. Today we find there's a resurgence. The bombers have come back in action. They're playing a huge role. And in fact, if you see where the PLAF, the PLA Air Force, the Chinese Air Force, they have kept their bombers alive for the longest time.
Yeah.
And
Though it's a dated aircraft, the H6 actually.
yes,
Yeah.
but the H6
Has evolved, yeah.
the version
The H20 now it's coming.
and now there's 20. No, even the H6, they had made it full glass cockpit. It's a different, same airframe, but different bird. They slapped on these long-range LCMs flew it to Guam, forcing the Yanks to pull out the bomber fleet, which was there for 16 years, bomber presence, continuous bomber presence, they used to call it, CBP. They moved back to the mainland because of this threat. So the point which I'm trying to make is they have huge relevance. Now it comes to in India's context. My personal views are very simple, is that on a continental application is relatively limited in India. Because for us, the threats are Pakistan, which you don't really need a bomber for it.
Yeah.
And for China, the depths are so far deep inside that you would have to transit through a huge airspace with A2AD.
So it makes you highly vulnerable. Yeah.
Vulnerable. But yes, alternative routes using the rest of the Southeast Asian.
But that's a long shot. Yeah.
It's a long shot. Okay, it needs a larger strategy. You need friends in places where you can operate from, like the US and has done. So, but in the maritime domain, it still has enormous relevance. And one thing I want to put that bombers willy-nilly, the fact of it is just having bombers with you lends a lot of strategic gravitas to your power projection and force capability, where nations look at you. So if you have a bomber, it's like, I have a bomber. So it's, suddenly the Indian military gets a lot more outlook. You'll see the change in the strategic community, the way they write about it. So from that perspective today, I think it does make sense.
But that's an interesting point you've raised right now, that essentially you see the main use of an asset of this nature more in an anti-ship role than a land attack role. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And if I just want to sort of push this argument a little further, that would you agree that when it comes to contiguous challenges that you have, both are main challenges, if you take Pakistan and China, are contiguous. For delivery of ordnance, isn't the land domain the best means to deliver that ordnance? I mean, if you have land-based missiles, for example, whether it's BrahMos, whether it's loitering munitions, whether it's long-range artillery, or whether it's some cruise missiles, etc. I mean, land has got several advantages which both, I would say, the air domain and the maritime domain do not have. Firstly, in the land, you're not that vulnerable, in the sense that, of course, even though they are mobile, you can harden, you can camouflage, you can disperse. You're not susceptible to weather conditions. You don't have any all-up weight limitations. You can regenerate as soon as you want to. So would you agree that your main instrument when it comes to, and particularly with newer and newer types of weapons coming in, loitering munitions going out to 1,000, 1,500 kilometers, that we need to leverage the land much more in terms of strike, And both the Air Force and the Navy, it's not that we remove strike land attack capabilities from them, but they become more niche, in certain areas where it's difficult maybe for the land to project power at that. That's regarding the, I mean, I'm not talking about the deeper maritime sector, I'm talking about, our contiguous
Absolutely,
nations.
absolutely. So a couple of thoughts on that. One is from the first part of use of bombers in the maritime domain. I would think if you really using bombers to deliver ordnance, frankly, at the point, why would you need bombers? As well, you can deliver it today. Actually, if you look at it today, the way things are, platforms really don't matter.
Yeah.
As much as stated,
The weapon matters more, yeah.
much can you outstick the adversary?
Yeah.
So if you have a long stick,
Then you don't, the
platform is not so relevant.
Yeah.
Okay, but the capability of that stick has to be very accurate.
Right.
So that is the challenge today the land vector is facing.
Right.
It's not that the land vector is new. Drones and missiles, from World War II onwards, they've been there, frankly. But to use it in the manner today, they became a substitute for mass. Mass of air power. So land vector brought in a substitute for mass. But there was a challenge because the moment you started increasing the range, accuracy was a trade-off. If you bring in high accuracy, high circular errors of probability, cost goes, a whole lot of other things associated with. But the problem, again, I would like to argue, is that we have been looking at weapons as an end in itself, as this or this, which is my biggest argument today against most of the thinkers when you talk about drones and missiles. I said, it's not this or that. They have put all together, expanded the realm of offensive warfighting capability of any medium using the aerial vector or the aerial medium.
Right.
So the land rockets, for example, the reason why the PLAF actually in Tibet against India used the PLARF, the rocket force, as a sort of compensation for the absence of the adequate air-launched offensive capability.
Right.
While you said the first things, it has huge advantages, like you said, you can keep it in depth. But the point is, given our scale and size, the further deep you go back will eat into your range. But yes, I get that long-range weapon system.
They're becoming longer and longer.
And plus, they're mobile, you can keep moving them around. Those advantages are all there. But you will also appreciate there are certain challenges. It's not so easy. So you need to create a whole lot of new infrastructure for maintenance. All that is possible. But the point is, can the rate of production is also something you need to get a force level. For it to be a seriously potent force, you need to scale up production, which we have challenges with.
But
those
issues apply both to the
Army, all the three services. All the three services.
This is not Army specific.
Not Army specific. But the biggest advantage you have with air as a separate vector, like you said, niche areas, it gives you a sense of that you can get airborne from anywhere and use it anywhere with the least reaction time possible. Because land redeployment, repositioning takes time. They are being monitored. That's exactly what happened over Ukraine. The battle space was leveraged, thanks to Starlink and the help given to the Ukrainians by the NATO. They were tracking the Russians, and that is what gave, contrarily, the Ukrainians the flexibility of moving their air defense about. So that advantage is there. But what does air do? It gives a huge boost in your range. It gives you a huge boost in to be able to operate from different areas simultaneously, where you would have to either pre-position them well in hand. So when it comes to mass and concentration, the kind of effects you can get out of air power is way more. That is undeniable. Because in land, you have to pre-position everything. The moment you start pre-positioning vectors like that, which are being tracked, it gives away a lot of aspects. In the air, it's a little more flexible. Then there is other issue of accuracy. Okay, because you can sight it and track it. Some of the weapon systems till the terminal stages, which doesn't happen so much from a ground launch vector.
But I mean, if you're firing, let's say, BrahMos, for example, it's the same weapon, whether you're slaying it off an aircraft or whether you fire it off a ground weapon. So
absolutely. Up to a point. Up to a point. But what I'm saying is that standoff range gives you that additional expansion of range and flexibility. So those are the critical.
But that additional range is useful where you need that range. In a country like Pakistan, which is thin and long, maybe once you have the extended range weapon, you may not.
But the advantage here is that you can sort of swing out both ways and operate from different sides. I can come from the southern side as well.
So that's the point I'm trying to make, that if the main mass is land, and the Navy and the Air Force, plug in the gaps in this respect. That I think would be a.
But here I have a point.
Yeah.
So for the longest time, see, strategic targeting is not, it's just not about just having rockets today and targeting. It's a concept of war fighting which needs a whole lot of refinement. That is targeting itself. It's a science. The kind of targeting science and the levels which we have reached in Air Force,
it has to dissipate to the army also to come up
to
to
a great extent. Because army looks at it very difficultly. From your land risk vectors, your ranges and your range of operation is limited.
They're looking at, so far they've been looking at the tactical battle space, but now they're getting weapons that can even go beyond.
Absolutely, absolutely. But most of their thing was brute force, mass power, concentration coming in. Whereas the Air Force, you specialize into precision. So the advantage you have here on this is that in targeting, like today, when the kind of targets we did hit in Sindhu, each target from a bridge or you want to hit a refinery, the targeting study has to, it's a involved thing, the vulnerability, the
but
science.
But this is a structural issue, which can,
yes, but it also requires years of experience and build up for application, which is, I think, taken very simply and easily. It's, please understand, it's almost decades and decades of experience built up. So it's very easy to say today for an army guy, let's say for an infantry guy, so carry out armor or think with like an armor guy, it's an entirely different.
So one more issue, which you talked even before we come to the other issues about application of EPA in the maritime domain, you raised this issue regarding stick length and the weapon, and how the weapon in many ways you can make the argument has started outweighing the platform. If you have a long range weapon which you're going to fire, without exposing your platform to risk, or at least without maybe a strong term to use, but with reduced risk, let's say, then you may not invest that much into your platform. In which case, do you think that we need to do a rethink in terms of, certain very high-end capabilities that we're looking at in terms of, let's say, super cruise or thrust vectoring, or, great emphasis on stealth, etc. Because finally, if you're going to you're talking about, okay, the PL-15 is going out, let's say, to 220 kilometers. I mean, the PL-17, they say, is 400 kilometers. Similarly, we are going to also, with time, get similar weapons, which are going to go out to that range, 400, 500 kilometers. So do we need to do this rethink so that we can better employ the resources that we are, putting into our armed forces?
So this is a debate, I think, which is relevant, ongoing, and it occupies a lot of mind. But again, I say this here, that unfortunately, again, we are looking at it from a certain end state. That. We're looking at only this or that. Do we need to do this, or do we start looking at only that? I have a problem with that, because what happens is, when you bring in technology and high-end technology at a cost, automatically reduces the numbers and capability. But for the threat scenario that we have and the kind of adversaries that we have, a large conventional deterrence or a large force and mass remains an important aspect of our deterrence. You can't make that entire mass high-tech.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that you can maintain that. In fact, you can increase that mass if you lower the platform cost.
No, most certainly. So, like you said, yes, this I think is a natural process which is happening all over, organically in all the militaries of the world.
Right.
We are quietly redefining the things. Yeah, there's a lot of debate goes on the extreme end. Oh, this is it. Like, drones brought in this whole thing that, they are the, the silver bullet will change warfare. No, they will not bring you strategic outcome. They'll bring you tactical victories. They will not bring you a strategic outcome. You will not win wars because of drones, but they will enable victory.
Even there, let me ask you one more question. Our conceptualization of drones is a small quadcopter. Drone can be an unmanned F-16.
Certainly, absolutely.
So, I mean, why should we, when we think of drones, somehow we always think small and, but that conceptualization has to change.
So that conceptualization, I think, has been held hostage by Ukraine, the mass of drones in the tactical battle spaces. But if you really look at drone application, look at the way the global war of terror. I mean, they dominated continents, sitting in the deserts of Nellis, Nevada. They were taking out targets in Africa and in Afghanistan. But the challenge there is, you did that over uncontested airspaces. Drones are a huge challenge in contested spaces and or highly contested spaces. So like in the maritime domain is perfect for you, and you can do a lot more. Peacetime, you can do a certain amount, but moment you fly over adversarial territory, it's violation of airspace. So now your application is limited to peacetime.
Yeah, but I mean that again, if you're thinking of a drone that is, which does not have any AD capability, is not able to enter into an air-to-air combat. But if you extrapolate the way things are going right now, I mean, if you're
Sure.
saying, even if you're talking about these wingman concept, etc., where the drone is almost as capable as the platform that it is accompanying, So once we reached there,
Absolutely.
that was
No, I agree with you. So the point I'm trying to make is that we are in a transition phase, in the whole business of air power. And this is what I'm saying. This is where the challenge, I think, lies in understanding air power, because the technology transitions have been so swift from its inception that the air power practitioners themselves keep struggling to keep up with the transitions. Forget about from a guy from an army, navy, or a civilian trying to
to understand
the whole thing.
Yeah.
So there lies a I think a fundamental difference, and this is not just Indian Air Force and Indian Army and Indian Navy. Every air force in the world has faced this problem, and the US is still struggling with it.
But the thing it's a matter of choices at the end of the day, because your kitty is always restricted.
Absolutely.
And these choices have to be, I suppose, that you can think it out through up to a certain extent, but finally you have to put yourself on a limb and go down a certain path.
Absolutely.
So,
So like honestly, I mean, if you look at this, 42 squadron argument, it was made in a time and space for it. But you look at capabilities. What is more important? Okay, someone said, okay, now both the nations coming together, cohesive threat, we need this number goes up to, that old Tata committee, 60 squadrons. Fair enough. The question is today, will it be all 42 squadrons or 60 squadrons of the same kind of things? No, not necessarily. So the point is, there will be, I think, a wise mix.
Manned, unmanned.
Unmanned, everything. Land, air, everything coming together. My argument today is, please include land-based air power in the larger conceptual construct of military and national security, which frankly got pushed into the bargain in the past because we talked about strategic air power. What have we done strategically with our air power? We have constrained air power in every operation except 1971, every war. Right down 47, 62, not there, 65, 99, Kargil. Balakot and here, there were certain constraints still. 71 is the only time you used full-fledged offensive air power. But because of which I think it went out of our mindsets. Very interestingly, Indian Air Force strategic targeting was 3% of our effort, which included this famous Karachi strikes, which the Navy also took active part in. But it took out Sui gas plant, the Kiamari oil tanks, the whole lot of targeting which had done with the hunters and Canberras actually to a great effect. It impacted Pakistan within that war itself. 71, 14 days. The Prasad, who wrote the Indian history, edited the Indian MOD history, talks about air power and the strategic targeting taking the fury deep into Pakistan. That means the war which was detached only in the front brought the fury deep inside. It changed their mental outlook because of now they found Air Force hitting you inside. It's something you can't see, the damage taking place. That was a psychological effect. But more importantly, it had a huge effect wherein fuel had to be brought in from Iran by road. And it says in the book that if this continued for a little more time, Pakistan would have been on its knees. But the problem was we didn't understand and appreciate strategic targeting as a potent military instrument in our military strategy in the past.
So when you talk about strategic targeting and land-based air power, okay, 42, 60 squadrons, whatever, I mean, there are various studies which are done. Would you include land-based missile regiments as part of that, which the Air Force owns? I mean, finally, if the idea is to deliver effects, if you're going to launch a weapon, you can either sling it on the bottom of an aircraft or you can fire it off the ground. When you're talking about these squadrons, you think, would these squadrons also play a sizable role in the overall force structure of the Air Force?
I think most certainly. See, it's not so much like army. It's like I said, let's not get territorial about it. But look at it from a larger perspective. That for the longest time, the COSC targets, Chiefs of Staff Committee targets, strategic targeting has been with the Air Force.
Yeah.
What does it mean? It's not just that you're just the keeper of the target system, but the fact is it's a whole philosophy of how do we engage those depth targets.
Right.
That means to reach those depth targets, you have to have a certain offensive philosophy. So that weaves in
Everything.
the entire thing of air power.
Including missile regiments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So earlier that was not available to us. In fact, we used to reach out to the army to, can you help us, with the strategic targeting? But it will be a mistake to try and, the only point which I'm trying to make is not so much of an ownership issue as to who has the most stated experience and core competence for the longest period of time and specializations to deal with it.
Yeah.
So this is where I think the real inter-services thing should come. Certain land vectors, beyond the tactical necessities, leave it be with the Air Force. How does it matter?
So let's shift gears, and shift to the maritime domain. Yeah. Where do you see employment of air power and whoever owns it, in the maritime domain going? And do you think our track record so far has been good, or where do you see we could have done better, or how we need to change it?
So, okay, history aside, this whole thing about the need for maritime recce, and that's how the whole aviation thing started. What is today's lack when it comes to the Navy? Offensive capability in the maritime.
Yeah.
Air launched. Okay, there's a tremendous amount of surface launched and sub-surface launched capabilities which are coming up. And so this is one aspect which it's still reliant on the Air Force.
Yeah.
Now there are challenges here because the way we looked at offensive targeting in the maritime domain, we had past constructs because our past target was hitting, let's say, a CBG, a carrier group. So protected by a carrier. How do you target that? And that was probably the highest level of operational thought in terms of complexity of joint operations between Army and the Navy. But look at your Navy itself today. The way you've expanded, where you're reaching out to so many other places, where my point is, in fact, I was talking about it in today's lectures itself, that you have a huge area of responsibility which you've taken on, and rightly so, justifiably so, but it has overstretched your capacity to handle that. My point is, Air Force, Navy, they're all services in transition in terms of increase in capability. Does it not make perfect sense that in the context and the present context, seeing the trend where war fighting is changing and towards a more multi-domain approach, why would you like to leave out land-based air power, which gives you reach and response? Today, let's say that you notice some ships, your PATIs pick up a fleet or some naval activity which needs immediate response. You launch air power. They can do it for some time till your Navy reaches, because you bring in presence and persistence, which the Air Force can't. Reach and response is Air Force, presence and persistence by Navy. Doesn't it make perfect sense in the maritime domain? So that is the level of employment we need to get to beyond just tactical kinetic applications, but from a larger force projection perspective, from a Navy strategic thinking. My argument is you're not leveraging this enough because of where we think. We structure it down in our tactical thinking and operational outlook, but we all need to step back.
So, Chow, I'd fully second what you're saying in that when you look at it from, let's say, of course, everyone wants integral air power, and to some extent, the Navy has got very strong, and it's probably going to increase with time. As the Rafales come in, etc. That will grow. But the numbers are few and far in between. As you finally got 2 carrier groups, which is finally, and what you're going to be pitted against in time. If you look at, with China's, with now you're talking about the Fujian now, which is already in the 80,000 ton range. Which is fully capable with and they've jumped past, they've leapfrogged past steam catapults and gone into emails and all that straight away. This will be replicated with more and more now. So if you have maritime power that is coming in, and of course, there are challenges in China bringing maritime power 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers from the mainland and coming over here, and to sustain that maritime power becomes complex. But at the end of the day, given their numbers, etc., you have to look at asymmetric solutions, because if you look at symmetric solutions, you're going to, their build rate is enormous here. You can't look
Absolutely.
at a navy that is outbuilding you 4 to 5 times every year. Is your build rates are, that is a differential. You have to look at asymmetric. And to me, that asymmetric, if you're going to operate only maritime versus maritime, it becomes more symmetric. So you look at, as this force comes up closer and closer to the mainland, you have to, that asymmetry has to develop by having maritime plus land-based power, which is combating only a maritime power. And as you come up closer, the ability of land-based power to project itself in the maritime domain, now whoever owns it, whether the Air Force owns it, or whether the Navy owns it, or whether it's a missile-based force, it becomes more and more. And you develop that asymmetry in that sense, where you're able to have your effects on a force that is coming in here, which is relying purely on maritime power, because they don't have anything else. Maybe with a little bit of support from rocket forces, as and when they're anti-ship ballistic missiles and etc. So I would agree with you absolutely on this, that we need to work together and see how we can leverage each other, to produce the best possible effects.
Look at the US. What's happening in South China Sea and East China Sea and over the Chinese mainland and its eastern and southern seaboards. Conceptually, the carrier battle groups, the US carrier battle groups, have been the elemental threat to China for the longest time. Not just because of maritime power, because they bring in a huge amount of air power capability, which is what worries the Chinese, because now their mainland, the home and hearth, is under threat. So what has it been trying to do for the longest time? Push the
further and further out
to the first island chain
and beyond now.
So so you own the surface till the first island chain and are pushing towards the second island chain, but you didn't own the air power domain, the aerial domain, which the US still dominated.
But but air power is restricted in stick length. They can't come that far. If you push them out further and further away.
Exactly. So what have they done? Look at it very smartly. Those islands, the Yanks laughed at it, didn't take them seriously. Now it's worrying the hell out of them. And I wrote about it 6 years ago, that those are like forward fortresses. Today, Subi Creek, Fairy Cross and Mischief have three airfields which can stack in 100 aircraft and offensive air defense capability.
So you push out that envelope even
further. So you are effectively pushing out the air reach further and further away, and you have replaced it with an offensive threat of long range standoff weapons. Not just land based, now air launch capabilities. So that is the whole game. So, but the challenge is the kind of core competencies to be able to project air power in a military fashion to the level and experience and skill which the US has mastered historically over the years. China, I think, is a long way away from it. Just having weapons doesn't give you the capability to use it and employ it in a manner. But they're learning very fast.
They're learning fast.
Very fast. Here I bring in an argument. Look at air power. If you look at the 7-dash line, or the ox's tongue, as the Chinese call it, look at the countries involved. Small air forces, 200, 150, some old, some legacy. They're all struggling to upgrade their air forces. Your white and your grey hull in this waters of these countries are way outnumbered by the South China fleet. And now you bring in their coast guard. So, I mean, maritime domain, they are overwhelmed. Has anyone considered air power here? So we as India, we train with each of these countries. We have defense agreements with most of these countries and exercise with these countries. How about looking, like you mentioned, asymmetric? How about bringing these countries together for asymmetric application of air power as a
counterbalance?
Counterbalance. It may not be enough, but it is something. The problem is this, that we always seek the ultimate solutions, which is what stymies us from, and personal ownership. These are the two roadblocks in our actual outlook thinking of using military power in an offensive manner. So I think that what you said is absolutely important, that there's a huge role and scope. And now I'll turn this argument another way around. While the Indian Navy has been looking at it in this manner, in a strategic manner, increasingly the Pakistan threat is re-emerged. For a long time, you stayed away. Navy's concentration was on a different domain. You will have to come back at some point, orient your thinking towards safeguarding the mainland. That is been sort of put behind in the strategic goals which the Navy had set. Now, when you come and start doing that, you will need much more convergence with land-based air power. Your Rafales can do enormous, but you're going to push your carriers to a point where it can't impact. And now look at, because the Air Force at some point is asking, your carriers, you can as well handle the air defense in the Karachi area. But you don't have the radar systems and the whole wherewithal for it. So it needs a lot more, I think, convergence rather than this extreme pole positions of employment of old concept of air power.
So the more, I would say, interlinkages, the more interactions, and it cannot be left to personalities. They have to be structural. It all has to be defined in a structural sense, so that you're forced in a sense to collaborate, cooperate. And the employment then, of air power, whether it is, maritime based or whether it is land based, your effects have to be greater than the aggregate of the two. There has to be a multiplier.
Absolutely.
There has to be a multiplier. So I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I really thank you once again for this engaging conversation. Look forward to many such conversations in future and wish you the very best in all your endeavors.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's been wonderful because frankly, this is something I've been talking about and writing about for the longest time. But see, unless you rise above the, what should I say, from the service backgrounds and the alliances and the deep, sort of connects with the service. But we need to, if you look at, I think, different from a larger perspective, I think the younger generation gets it.
Yeah, even I think so. I think they're not so much bound by culture, but if you spend, 15, 20 years in the service, you get steeped in culture,
And I am afraid, I mean, this is just off the path of the main discussion, that some of us veterans come with a lot of past legacies and ideas which we are very averse to let go. Little realizing that has transited and changed over a period of time. Old ideas of air power, they're still there with the older lot. So I think that's where you have to see that the air power thinking to the Air Force. I mean, that's their bread and butter. So grant them that they're.
So let's hope that the younger generation is better placed than what we were.
I think
in bridging these gaps and to make us a better fighting force than what we are.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot once again.
Absolute pleasure.
Good luck and God bless.
Thank you.